So welcome back. I'm delighted to be joined by Zoltan Istvan, who is or was a candidate in the 2016 presidential election running for the Transhumanist Party. He also tried to secure the Republican nomination for the upcoming presidential election. So Zoltan, thank you very much for your time. Now, obviously, a film's come out about you, which sounds quite interesting. I've literally just watched it. It's very good. So it's called Immortality or Bust. I think it's available on Netflix and some other platforms.
Well, so right now it's not available on Netflix, but it's available on Amazon Prime. It's available on iTunes. We're trying to sell it to Netflix. I don't, it's not my film, a bunch of people made it, but I have been, of course, as the person involved in, I guess the star in it, I've been actively involved in trying to push it for the people. But we've been, it came out yesterday. We've been really excited about it. We did have its public debut, about 8-9 months ago, because it won an award at one of the film festivals, and then we took it around the film festival sort of circuit, and finally just yesterday we got our big distribution day, and I'm excited. So to have it out now, because honestly, it's taken 4.5 years to make, and someone's been following me around forever, so it's been a long process.
If anyone from Netflix is watching, it's very good. I fully recommend it. I mean, the place I wanted to start with was, so obviously you've been kind of pushing the transhumanism agenda for quite a while now. I mean, how much difference did you notice in terms of kind of the public reaction between 2016 and 2020? I mean, do more people know what the ideology is? Do more people, they're kind of familiar with it? Are they open to it? Or is it still very much a kind of niche topic?
Well, I think it's breaking into the mainstream. Like, for example, there was a big article in the Wall Street Journal just this last week about transhumanism specifically. The 2016 campaign was a big success in the sense that we really, the Coffin Bus, which the documentary is about, was a really great way to get attention. We got about 100 million views, and a lot of people like New York Times and Vox and whatever embedded with us on the bus. So transhumanism grew a lot from that campaign. Afterwards, it's been a lot of organic growth, and just because the technology is actually coming to play, like Elon Musk's company about Neuralink and things like that. But then came the coronavirus, and like the media environment, transhumanism sort of took a step back. You would think because of coronavirus, it would take a step forward, and it seems to be taking a step now. But for the first 3 months, nobody really was talking about living indefinitely through science and technology or cyborgism or all these other ideas because, the world's facing a pandemic. And yet, transhumanists have been advocating forever for example, universal vaccines to all sorts of things, the various dimensions of the coronavirus, as well as existential risk with nuclear weapons or asteroids. So we've always been right on the existential risk kind of frontier. So now I think people are starting to say, wait a sec, it was transhumanists who all along were saying, we need to worry about things like plagues. This is a transhumanist ticket. So it seems to be coming right back. But as you know, the whole world's been sort of changed from COVID-19. So we're just seeing where the movement as a organization, as a social movement sort of lands.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. One thing I was kind of wondering is, obviously with the coronavirus pandemic, that increased interest in science and kind of public respect for science and possibly in long-term funding for science, that could be good for transhumanism?
Well, we think it should be good. But it really, a lot of the growth of transhumanism comes in two different formats right now. The first is it comes from the scientists themselves. And unfortunately, as everyone knows, because of the lockdown, about 200,000 experiments had to be put on hold or stopped altogether around the world because of the lockdowns. So that was terrible for science. And I was very against that because I really worried that when we lock down science, you actually lose the momentum, and therefore you lose more lives because science gets kind of stopped. But the other aspect of it, hopefully though now a lot of the experiments have continued and maybe not too much ground was lost. But I mean, for example, budgets at like Harvard University have been cut to like 30% in some cases. Most people think Harvard University is like, oh, schools, this. What people don't realize is that huge amounts of the cures for cancer or the new types of treatments for Alzheimer's are coming out of these universities. So when you cut budgets because of a bad economy and because of lockdowns, you actually taking life years away from people because the innovations take that much longer to actually come into fruition because scientists don't have the funding. But the second aspect of transhumanism that's been really strange is how the media treats it. And like I said, with coronavirus, the media has been much more focused on the ramifications of the plague itself and not so much open media. You know, when the times are good, the media reports on everything because it's always looking for this interesting angle, and transhumanism got covered a lot, which helped it to grow. But recently, not so much. But it does seem that there is a resurgence now as we sort of get a bit of better grip on coronavirus to say, all of a sudden, well, what is the long-term ramifications of coronavirus? And it's pretty much what transhumanists have been saying all along, which is the number one priority for transhumanists is to make it that we don't die from cataclysmic events. And that can be anything from asteroids to plagues to, just environmental collapse even. You know, I mean, it can be any kind of thing. And it's not a left or right issue. It's just transhumanists want to overcome biological death. And they look for ways that typically kill humanity in large numbers.
Yeah. You know, speaking to a couple of people from the UK Transhumanist Party quite recently, and what they were kind of saying is they felt that transhumanism needs almost like an Andrew Yang moment. It needs a moment where it goes from being just an idea to being a household name. But they think that moment's coming, but it's not quite sure when. I mean, is that your view? Do you think there'll kind of come a point where it will go quite suddenly from being, you know, this idea which is kind of discussed in academic and scientific circles, to being something that everyone knows about, and probably some technological breakthrough will bring us there? Is that your view?
Well, I think you're right. I think it'll be a technological breakthrough. I think, you know, in Andrew Yang's case, the world was ready to hear from somebody reputable like Mr. Yang that basic income could help inequality, because inequality has been growing quite dramatically over 10, 20 years. And so people said, well, especially those who of less means thought, hey, this makes a lot of sense that I would get free money. You know, how you pay for that and all this other stuff, that's a whole nother idea. But the point, though, is that transhumanism, I think, a moment will come, and maybe, you know, Elon Musk might be responsible for that moment. I really tend to think that when we start having people that have implants or headsets that connect to the net and to the cloud and to AI, all of a sudden people are going to take a step back and say, that is so weird. This is not the same thing as just being on Facebook with your friends. We're talking about something that is much more significantly powerful. And I think when people start realizing that you can use that for capitalistic means, for work reasons, then everyone's going to say, wow, the transhumanist era is really here. Now, I kind of wish that people would just say, wow, people are dying. That should in itself bring on the transhumanist era. But a lot of people don't worry about death. They just think, oh, it's, you know, they're either religious or whatnot. And so it's not a big issue. So I think probably it's going to be a medical breakthrough of some sort that makes people say, wait a sec, I want one of these brain implants because I want to dream in the cloud. Like, the idea of dreaming in the cloud sounds really exciting to a lot of people. So that'll probably be the moment, but that could still be 2, 4, maybe even 8, 10 years away, especially dependent on how far research goes because of coronavirus. But a moment's coming, I can tell you that. And it's going to be a breakthrough very similar to Mr. Yang or to the environmental movement, you know, back 20 years ago. We're going to wake up and say, hey, I either love transhumanism or I think it's the worst thing ever. And then there's going to be civil talk, you know, debate about it, maybe civil unrest. I mean, we're talking about the most dramatic change in the human race that anyone has ever seen. So it's going to be a wonderful moment, and yet very, very challenging.
Do you think kind of the ethics around human body modification will become almost a defining political issue of the 21st century?
Yes, I absolutely think. I think at least in the next 20 to 30 years, the body modification will become everything. I think what's going to happen after that is very interesting. It's like the AI age and the genetic editing age. You know, the genetic editing age is kind of body modification, but it's really the AI age that I think changes things. This idea that you're not just connecting your biology to the cloud and your thoughts, but you're connecting it to another intelligent consciousness. And there are privacy issues involved with that. There are power issues involved with that. How far do you go? Is a robotic arm better than your biological arm? But is a robotic arm connected to an AI that kind of knows everything and has perfect, let's say you can, like, for example, throw a football perfectly for a mile away. I mean, this will change our entire sense of being human beings. So there's the body modification age, the next 10, 20 years. and then comes the AI age. And this is where I think really it's almost the age of the singularity, because it only is going to take 10 years before in the AI age, before we kind of make that big transition. And as wild as this sounds, I don't know if it's the end of humanity, but it's certainly the beginning for some of us to go into a different era altogether, assuming that the human race allows this stuff. Because it's kind of like the genetic editing stuff in China. You know, they had a couple designer babies and the world sort of freaked out, and now you don't hear about it. It's all moratoriums. And, you know, that said, genetic editing research is going forward because there's capitalistic opportunities. And I think it's, you know, it's a great opportunity, you know, in itself.
Yeah. But I finally got around to reading your book, so that's The Transhumanist Wager, which I thoroughly recommend. I got around to reading that at the beginning of this year. And one thing I found really interesting is that one of the issues you addressed, and a lot of transhumanists don't always address that much, is kind of the opposition this is likely to provoke. So I mean, clearly there's going to be some people who are very uncomfortable with the direction this is heading in. I mean, you know, potentially for religious reasons, potentially for other reasons. I mean, do you think the transhumanist movement at some point is going to have to toughen up a lot? It's going to have to accept, it's going to get a lot of incoming flack. It's going to have to, because I mean, at the moment, obviously, it's a kind of fringe political intellectual movement, scientific movement. At some point, when it becomes mainstream, it's going to have to accept that there are going to be a lot of people who are really going to hate what they stand for. I mean, potentially even, you know, the use of violence, as occurs in your book.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think within 5 to 10 years, you'll definitely have public protests against the technology. I mean, frankly, in San Francisco, we're already seeing it. And I would even say that, you know, Black Lives Matter and things like that, while it's not tied in any way to transhumanism, it is tied to this idea that there is unrest in society. And there's unrest because there's inequality and because you have the haves and the have-nots. I mean, just even looking in San Francisco, you know, it's like in the 15 years that I've been here, it's almost so unaffordable that huge amounts of people have had to either leave or just barely get by. And so now that's why some of these people have been throwing themselves in front of Google buses so the buses can't go in the morning and pick up the employees. And then they also wear masks. They throw these kind of gas bombs. I mean, it's minor civil unrest. You hear about it sometimes, but this will increase until we probably get something like Black Lives Matter on that scale, except it'll be sort of anti-transhumanist, saying technology has gone too far. In America, it's ripe for it. Maybe not Europe so much. Europe's kind of much more sensible, balanced. It's also not as religious. But in America, we have huge religious components. And that makes it very, you know, most religions say don't modify the human body. And that's a huge issue. That's where I think the crux of the problem in my book, The Transhumanist Wager, discusses this at length, because most religious people would say you're not supposed to mess with the human form. The body in itself is sacred, as given to us by God. Whereas transhumanists say, no, the body is just kind of tools designed to be modified for whatever we want. What I'm trying to do is, I used to be much more like atheistic, agnostic. Now I'm actually encouraging a lot of Christian transhumanists saying, well, because I see the the best way to move forward, especially as a politician, is somebody who says it's Christianity that can accept some transhumanist aims in order to fulfill its greater purpose. And there's these ideas that even if you're, you know, somebody very spiritual, you might use different technologies like virtual reality to get closer to God, or even life extension technology so you can live longer. So you might promote the, you know, God, and or promote, trying to tell people about God, and or whatever your missionary kind of, values are. But that's been my trajectory the last 2 years. It's funny, in the documentary, you see it a little bit, because I don't know if you remember this point when I'm at the big things, and there's this like those the ultra right Christians, and they're like, you know, this is sin and Christianity and only God. It's a funny moment in the documentary, but it also shows the extreme. Those people are definitely going to be very anti-transhumanist to begin with. Yeah. But I hope that a lot of other semi-religious people will say, you know what, science and technology has always helped the human race, whether we were religious or not. Why don't we just embrace these new things and keep our faiths? And I think that's perfectly acceptable. You know, as sort of a libertarian person, I think that's perfectly acceptable to move forward.
Yeah. I should apologize very quickly. You may have noticed I'm sweating like an absolute pig. It's 31 degrees in the UK, which is very hot for us, but probably like normal for you. I mean, one thing that kind of makes me slightly more optimistic is that even if, say, America or any one country tries to stifle the transhumanist revolution for religious or other reasons, I mean, there are so many other countries in the world, and the kind of the innate competition between them surely means it's going to go ahead somewhere. Even if it's a kind of a more atheist country like China. But I mean, conversely, that also worries me, because will it happen in an authoritarian country like China? I don't know if that sort of concerns you.
Well, it is, and let's be honest, at this point, China is now clearly overtaking the United States in its economy and in every way, really. And they're spreading their tentacles to all these other developing nations, so they're going to be very well positioned to kind of lead the world forward with their culture. And you know, and I've been saying this for a year. I ran in the 2020 presidential race, really, you know, thumping down, saying the biggest issue at hand is making sure China doesn't get too far ahead, and making sure that, you know, the Western democracies end up the winner. I don't think that's going to happen. I hate to say it, even just in 1 year, I think we're the loser. And so now we're in this big, you know, conundrum. We have a nation of very capable people, China, huge in its population, but ultimately controlled by a communist government. And they see I see none of them giving up any of that power. And they're going to be influencing the world with its culture and its technology. And they're not afraid to take these leaps. They're atheistic or at least secular in their core. And whereas, you know, in America, we have all these, when it comes to genetic editing, our president, our vice president, they're all against it for religious reasons. China doesn't really have those problems, so they're going to lead the world forward. And I'm concerned extremely about a communist regime pushing the transhumanist agendas forward. And yet, nobody seems to say that this is a big issue. You know, Trump seems to still be focused on immigration as his big issue, you know, and jobs and taxes or whatever, you know, or maybe bashing the media. I don't know what but you know, the problem is, I wish Trump would really take a hard stand against China, and not just a hard stand economically, but say to them, we're going to beat you in innovation. I just wish Trump would say, we're going to take a giant amount of money from the military and we're going to put it into science. We're going to beat China in their own game, forget our own Judeo-Christian values. It's not like you have to give up your values just because you're developing AI or genetic editing, but you got to culturally put forth that money. And I'm incredibly worried. We've all seen this year how much power China has gained, and it's a scary time. It's a scary time. We're going to look in 10, 20 years, and they're going to be the dominant player in the world. And we're going to ask ourselves, how did we let democracy, you know, become the second-rate guest on planet Earth?
I mean, I don't know if it's something that worries you, but one thing that worries me is it sometimes seems that some of these kind of autocratic leaders, authoritarian leaders, are thinking more about kind of big technological breakthroughs than democratic leaders. So, for example, I mean, Xi Jinping is clearly very interested in, you know, artificial intelligence, gene editing, that kind of thing. I mean, Vladimir Putin, I think a couple of years back, said that the first country that perfects artificial intelligence, but I can't remember the exact quote, but it's basically where the country perfects artificial intelligence will rule the world. Whereas, you know, in the US and the UK, we've got politicians that sort of seem to largely ignore it. I mean, do you think the West needs a real wake-up call on this? We're falling behind, and I guess that's kind of where your movement can come in, because once you interest the public more in transhumanism, they'll then put pressure on the political leaders.
Well, I think the question you asked is fascinating. Is do dictatorships or totalitarian governments have more reason to follow the technology than a democracy? And the problem with the democracy is that you must be elected. And in order to be elected, you must appeal to the people. And the way to appeal to the people is to appeal to the great majority of them. And that means playing it safe most of the time, which means you can't go out there and say, oh, these crazy ideas, even though we know technology and science have helped the human race for endless eons. You know, you can't just go out there and talk about this stuff, because so many people are kind of, in a democracy, you just want to win their votes. Which is why, for example, Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump didn't talk about AI, even though both of them know this is probably the major issue of our time. But when you have someone like Putin, or you have somebody like the Chinese leader, they don't need to worry about these things. They are already in office essentially forever. Or Putin not yet, but he's working on that. And they can take more of their own discretion and just say, okay, I don't need to worry so much about the people. I really need to worry about keeping the country ahead. And what's the easiest way to stay ahead of America? Well, to beat them in the science and technology game. And that's what's happened. So there is this idea that, you know, beneficial dictatorships may have a greater chance of embracing the transhumanist future. Now, I don't support that. I'm just telling you how I see it. I wish it was opposite. I wish we could get the people to see that it's really important for technology to thrive. But right now, generally speaking, most Americans don't care about transhumanist technology whatsoever.
And that's one thing I really like the way you ran for the Republican nomination, is you're talking about kind of the transhumanist revolution isn't really optional. It's the West's got to do it, because if we don't do it, China will do it, and then China will, you know, will just dominate the world. I mean, do you think that's an argument that transhumanists should be pushing further? But this isn't just about, you know, improving your body or improving the quality of life. This is about the survival of our civilization. It's about survival of the liberal democratic way of organising human society.
Absolutely. And that's what I think a lot of people don't get it, is that we're not just pushing transhumanism because it sounds good or because it's fun or we all want to live forever. We're pushing it forward as a way of life. I mean, democracy has emerged as sort of the leading, I think, way to organize society that is most fair and most beneficial for the human race while promoting a competitive environment like capitalism. It's done a good balance of those things, which is why the prosperity around the world has dramatically risen for everyone, from the lowest to the highest over the last 50 years. The world is simply a better place. But we do know from historical terms that if you have dictatorships that come in, they can reverse that. And it might be good for them, and it might even be good for their country, but it's not good for the population as a whole. So we need a better balance. We need people to get on board transhumanism, whether they like it or not, just because they're not going to like the transhumanism that China delivers. They'll like the transhumanism that democracy delivers, but they're not going to like the transhumanism that China delivers or that Putin delivers. So therefore, it's sort of a choice of evils in a way, but at least one is much more palatable than the other. And I think that's where Republicans and Democrats alike need to sit down and say, well, if the future is going to come, we better lead to it, whether or not we're ready for it.
Yeah. I mean, presumably, the transhumanist technologies, so, you know, gene editing, artificial intelligence, if used in the wrong hands, so this is, you know, where data comes in, it could kind of create a tyranny which is like nothing we've ever seen before as a species. I mean, it would make Stalinism look like liberalism. I mean, you know, they could genetically modify humans to make us more compliant and that kind of thing. I mean, it really is a battle for civilizational survival.
Well, I absolutely think it is a matter of survival. And I think, you know, some of the best quotes we talk about when we talk about existential risk, it's funny because the Transhumanist Bill of Rights talks about plagues, and it talks about trying to stop them. In the documentary Immortality or Bust, when I read the Transhumanist Bill of Rights at the US Capitol, we specifically talk about that a nation's priority must be to try to defend against these things. Well, clearly the world did not try to defend against coronavirus. And, you know, if an asteroid hit tomorrow, we'd all run around saying, who's responsible for this? But in many ways, we're all responsible for this. We're all responsible for even, you know, giant volcanoes and things like that. There are many, many existential threats all across the planet, cybersecurity threats right now. Nobody takes that stuff seriously because usually it doesn't happen, but it only takes one time to happen. And look, the world shuts down. So I think it's, you know, it is for our own survival and our own, you know, you kind of need an adult in the room. And that's really what it really requires, is an adult saying, hey, I know it's a little bit of pain and I know nobody wants to worry about this. We all just want to watch Netflix all day and shop at our Walmarts, whatever. But the world could end if we're not careful. Therefore, we need to develop transhumanist technologies for our own survival. And this is, you know, really what my book talks about, the transhumanist wager. The very first priority is overcoming death. Once you've overcome death, if you want to enter into the world of WALL-E, where we're all just kind of, I don't know if you've seen that animated film WALL-E.
Yeah.
Oh, you should see it. It's really great. It's made by Pixar, but it's the society where all these sort of like Americans live on a spaceship and they don't do anything all day long except eat hamburgers and watch Netflix. But it might be where our society is going. And I'm not saying that's good or bad. I don't think it's very creative. But the point, though, is that it's okay to do that as long as you've overcome death. because that's the priority. But the priority now is that there are 150,000 people dying a day, and we still stand cataclysmic events all the time. We have to be careful. So we must dedicate ourselves to overcoming these worries, and then we can decide however much we want to loaf or be lazy or just not do anything. But we must, as a species, overcome death first. And I think, unfortunately, though, with the totalitarian aspect we talked about, you also have to worry about democracy surviving in order to make sure that life continues in a way where our individual rights are respected. And so it's not just worrying about death now. It's almost, 20, 30 years ago, nobody was worried about democracy surviving because it became the dominant theme of all world governments, basically. And nobody was, Russia and China weren't really real players. And now all of a sudden, it does seem like roles are reversing. And we're really worried about, a handful of totalitarian regimes actually running the world. And that's not acceptable.
Yeah. I mean, one argument I find really interesting, so I've heard it from a few transhumanists, is, about the reasons for kind of human augmentation, human modification. Is it's not just about improving humans in the sense of, make us more intelligent, make us live long. It could potentially be about almost removing evolutionary mistakes or kind of characteristics which made sense in the society in which we evolved, to kind of hunter-gatherer societies, which are now very dangerous. So, for example, our extreme tribalism, our propensity towards violence. And I've had a couple of people argue essentially that the combination of human tribalism and violence combined with the weapon we already have, but certainly the weapons we're going would be a potential of extinction threat to the human species. I mean, the combination of kind of extreme tribalism and weapons, or more powerful nuclear weapons. I don't know what you think about that. I mean, do you think that we almost have to modify ourselves to kind of remove some of the effects from our evolutionary background?
Well, I do think we need to modify ourselves to make us more survival ready. And, that's very interesting. Like, for example, I do eat meat, so I'm not a vegan, but I do understand that there could come a time when we might use implants or change our biology or whatever it is, so that we can get maybe, for example, energy from the sunlight because we have plant DNA in our skin. And I know one thing that's going to be very happy. The 150 million animals that are killed every day, slaughtered every day, so that we can eat, are going to be very happy about that. And that reduces pain. That reduces pain worldwide. And I've argued saying, nature, people think nature, let's protect the environment and all that. And I also want to protect the environment. I want to protect the animals and all that. What people don't realize, though, is you step into the jungle, and that's a coyote trying to eat a rabbit, and a rabbit having to eat this. I mean, the entire world is eat or not be eaten. And that's outside of our human sphere, since we don't live like that anymore. But nature in itself is actually very antagonistic. And I think if we have a chance to weed out some of that antagonism, we will do not only the species a favor, but we will do also other life a favor that lives in a cycle of endless suffering and endless worry about being eaten. And it's not just being eaten, it's dying of plagues, it's being run over, whatever it is. Suffering is the core of human experience, and I would like to use technology to end suffering. And I don't know if I want to end 100% of it, but right now I think there's dramatically too much. And so there are a number of transhumanists that would like to use, like myself, science and technology to eliminate suffering. And that means using it to overcome or to modify our evolutionary trajectory so that we don't do those things. That doesn't mean changing a chemical in the brain either. It means, on a very philosophical, metaphysical way, stopping the cycle of eat or be eaten, or flight or non-flight. And that really is very, very different. That's where I think zeros and ones, data uploading, the real 100, 200-year transhumanist future is going to be much more moral, much more humanitarian. Even if we aren't humans anymore, it'll be much kinder because we won't be in this world where we constantly are consuming something, whether it's the planet, whether it's its resources, or whether it's each other. And then we can have this kind of freer society, I think, of just leisure and also maybe just kind of creativity.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I mean, one thing I hear transhumanists talk about quite a bit is we're kind of almost moving from an era of natural selection, so kind of Darwinian natural selection, to intelligent design, where we have the ability to modify ourselves and modify others. And obviously, for very obvious reasons, the kind of the level of emotional, the level of emotion and the level of feeling and that kind of thing, what we can do is quite strained under the conditions of evolution. I mean, clearly, if we just felt intense pleasure all the time, we'd never do anything, and then we'd get eaten by a lion. But in this kind of new age, when we can modify ourselves, we could massively boost pleasure. We could give ourselves experiences that we probably can't even begin to imagine, but it's just so intense, so amazing. I mean, is that something you think? I mean, but it's the beginning of a kind of a new era, and that we can just reimagine our kind of physical experiences.
Well, I do. And I mean, first off, when we talk about implanting memories, they're already doing that in rats right now. So we're probably 10 years away from commercial development of the idea that we can do that, and maybe even closer, maybe 5 years. And I think that'd be great, because we'll be able to teach humans, like give them almost like, experiences where you can experience something without experiencing it. And that will affect your moral outlook. But I think the real issue at hand is still our biology. Our biology is designed in a system to die, to end, to be finite, to be eaten flesh. And we really need to move to something silicon. We really need to move to data. We really need to move to something metal that's outside of biology, because biology and the cellular nature and of DNA structure, it's designed to be finite. It's designed to crumble and renew itself. And it's so funny in the documentary, John McAfee talks about this. He talks about saying the great thing about evolution is that it renews itself, but it's not great for the individual who has to die and that something else renews. And it's funny because John McAfee makes some great points in the documentary, but I disagree with him. I don't want to die, and I don't want my children to die, or my family or wife. I want us to be renewed without having to be somebody completely different that can't remember the old person. And that's really where the transhumanism philosophy takes place, is how to retain our consciousness and our sense of identity in another body or under other totally different circumstances, so that we could also still be better for the planet and better for our species and better for ourselves, without actually, I guess, staying in this, what I call a kind of a coffin of flesh.
I mean, kind of in terms of midterm stuff, so it's not the really long-term stuff. Is there like one issue that you think could really galvanise public support? I mean, the thing I was thinking about is not artificial wounds, but would have a huge benefit for half the population. Would obviously solve the incredibly tense dispute around abortion. Is it anything like that you really think that once we get there, that's going to really start changing attitudes?
Well, there's a couple things on the horizon that I think are really going to be good for the world. The first is, like, I think at some point, the Paralympics or the Special Olympics, you're going to have athletes that start outdoing normal-bodied athletes. So you're going to definitely, within 5-10 years, have a runner who's faster, with no legs, either exoskeleton technology or blades or whatever, that start outdoing the natural runners, like, let's say, Bolt. And I think from a perspective of culture, you're going to say, wait a sec, when a disabled person is stronger or better at the sport than another person, all of a sudden you're like, wow, we're entering a different age. But I think another one is, like, Wall Street is a classic example where a lot of the mid-level traders are being replaced because of AI. And I think when you start thinking about connecting your brain to AI and having that experience and, like, working your mind to be able to connect and maybe trade stocks and do as good of a job as the robots, then I think capitalism will kind of step in and say, wait a sec, everybody needs these kinds of implants or headsets or whatever, so that we all commune with AI, whether it's lawyers or doctors or whatever. And I think that could be a huge pivotal push. It's not a moment's notice, but it's something like the Elon Musk thing could really say, wait a sec, this is the transhumanist age. In order to be successful, you need to have this type of technology. But I think the other one that might really be this is the holy grail of transhumanism, is there's a lot of people working on genetic editing therapies, people taking them right now, trying to get the ability to reverse their cellular degeneration in order to live indefinitely. And as soon as somebody breaks that code, as soon as there's a shot, you just go boom. And now I don't age this month. That also will be the big change, because then you're going to say, wait a sec, do I not want to age? And then the question is, Do I have kids? Do I get married? I mean, and it's all going to come from one person finally breaking the code and saying, this is the shot that you take, or this is the pill that you take, and you no longer age. And I think that could also be the big moment. And I'd say within 5 or 10 years, we already have a couple FDA-approved drugs that are supposed to be doing a little bit of that, but we really need something where you can see month after month, year after year, you can measure and say, this person is no longer substantially aging. And I think that person is going to be like, first off, not only Nobel Prizes and things like that, but now you're talking about something very substantially different on an institutional level because of Social Security, because of paying taxes, because of the way health insurance works. All of a sudden, if you have, and like I said, there are now 7 or 8 different companies working on a single holy grail, chasing the gene therapy that actually stops aging in its footsteps. And if there's success with that, I think all of a sudden the world will say, wait a second, I don't have to die. What does that mean? And that will be maybe the moment that pushes us over.
One thing I was thinking is just kind of a random thought, but it definitely feels like we're kind of on the verge of a second great age of space exploration. So obviously NASA's going back to the moon, it's going to go to Mars, it's going to be a permanent moon base, and there's lots of other countries and indeed private companies getting involved. It kind of feels in the next 10 to 15 years, we'll definitely be entering a second great age of space exploration. I was wondering, how do you think that would fit in? I'm not obviously transhumanists, I'm sure would be supportive of it. But is this kind of an opportunity for transhumanists to spread their message about, the power of technology and how we can build very different societies, or should there be more cheerleaders from the side?
Well, I think this is what's really important here is the existential risk factor. I just feel that coronavirus and big giant asteroids and super volcanoes and things that historically have decimated population, we need a way to easily get off planet Earth, whether it's living in a space station or whether it's living on Mars or even whether just being on the moon. We need a way to get hundreds of thousands of people off planet Earth in a short amount of time. And I think that's one of the main reasons why I support space exploration. Of course, the main reason I support is because it's awesome. It's super. And so most transhumanists are just like, I want to get off planet Earth, just like we sort of want to get out of our flesh bodies. And it's not that I don't like my body. I love my life and things are great. But I mean, I really look forward to, like I said early in this interview, dreaming in AI, dreaming in the cloud, exploring virtual reality. I mean, there's so much more that our brain can do if we had different content and different stimuli and things like that. And the same thing with space exploration. Who doesn't want to go on a 1,000-year journey and explore the universe? These are things that I want to do. So that's a huge reason to do it. And I'm very happy that private enterprise is taking the ball and running with this, because it's good when the governments do as well because of existential risk factors. And I would consider that part of the defense of humanity. But it's even better when private enterprise does it, because it kind of levels the playing field and it keeps everybody more honest.
Just one final question. So obviously we talked earlier about whether transhumanism could have like an Andrew Yang moment where it really breaks through, and you suggest it could be something Elon Musk or something his technology does. But I was wondering, could it be you running in 2024? Is that something you thought about? Could that be?
Well, it's possible I'll run in 2024, but I think it's a little early for 2024, unless a certain moment of technology, like I said, a genetic editing therapy actually does reverse aging that is widely accessible, or Elon Musk comes up with a brain implant, all of a sudden this takes off widely. But I've often pegged my chances better at 2028, 2032, and I'll probably continue to run, because what happens is every time you run, you get your 20, 30 million views or sometimes more, and you build your reputation. And we keep moving the football closer. And that's really what the game is about. A lot of presidential candidates run 3 or 4 times before they actually hit the spotlight and make it. I mean, Mr. Yang was very lucky and also very good, so he was able to first time really get far. But I'm hoping that my time will come, and maybe my time will align right with the technology and right when they need somebody like myself, because it's also a matter of context. I think let's say coronavirus all of a sudden decimated planet Earth and decimated our species. Let's say that sad tragedy could happen. I think the world would need somebody more science-oriented now. It would decide it's a must. Right now, what's happening is, we're not at that place. You know, people still think they need real politicians. At some point, though, let's say inequality gets so big, that's when Mr. Yang's moment might be perfect, because everybody say it's time for that. And so, you know, my time will come, and I hope it'll be prompted also by some type of technological innovation that really says, wow, we need a presidential candidate and a president who's willing and who knows about these things and can lead the country as well as the world forward through these upcoming challenges. And but I still see mine closer to 2028, 2032.
Well, so Zoltan, as always, it's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you very much for your time. Also, this new film is on Amazon, but not Netflix mode. I'll try and find it on Amazon. I'll put like a link in the description. But yeah, so thank you very much. It's been really interesting, and you know, best of luck with all the work.
Absolutely. Well, hey, thanks. Great talking to you again, and thanks so much. And you know, the film is also on iTunes and a myriad other places. Like 8 or 9 cable channels have it, like AT&T and Cox and Frontier. So it's just whatever your subscription service is, just Google for it on the TV channel and you'll see it, because it went out through the largest independent or one of the largest independent distributors. So it reaches 1 billion households. It's just, you've got to find it. It's like there's all these different subscription models. Of course, Amazon and iTunes are the easiest way to get it.